I'm so excited for this one. So excited. Just want to welcome everyone who is here so far to our Writing Our Way Out talk. I have a very special guest today, Dr. Thema Bryant. She is going to be joining us today. I know a lot of people are excited for this and just helping us write more authentically. Yeah, Dr. Thema, for people who don't really know you or not too familiar, do you think you could give us just a brief introduction of yourself?
Certainly, I would love to, and so glad to be in the room in this space with you all, our kindred writers. And I'm Dr. Thema Bryant. I'm a licensed psychologist living in Los Angeles, California. Oh, thank you, Stephanie, for checking out the podcast. I'm also an ordained minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I am a poet and a sacred dancer, an activist, a mother, a sister, a friend. And I would say my overarching identity is healer. And so healing through art, healing through therapy, healing through ministry is what I'm here for myself and for others. I teach at Pepperdine University in the graduate program, people who are getting their master's or their doctorate degree in psychology. And I was recently elected president-elect of the American Psychological Association. And so all of that gives me a very full life, but a joyful life as well.
Nice. So awesome to hear. Once again, I just have to say that like we are so excited to have you. Me and Mikhail were particularly really looking forward to this. So, we have so many questions to ask you. But I think the best place, to start would just be, with writing. Obviously, writing allows us to, dive into different emotions and different feelings. What would you say you're writing yourself out of this season?
Yeah, I love the question and this theme. And as I, thought on it, I would say in this season, I'm writing myself into, right?
I
That there
love
have been seasons in my life when I was writing out of identities, out of life events, out of jobs, there are times when I needed to like get out. And I would say in this season, I'm writing in, right? I'm writing into the unfolding of who I am and who I am becoming. I'm writing into these new professional roles that I'm taking. So, one of the things with leadership is when you're in leadership, you have a lot of eyes on you and you also have a lot of responsibility, right? So, I come into that role um, with the hopes and the prayers and the desires of the people who voted for me. And so then I find myself in these spaces, in these meetings where uh, I have to speak truth to power. And so to get myself in the mindset so that I could represent, the writing helps me to stay clear, right? Because often you can be surrounded by a lot of other voices, or you may be the only one saying what you're saying. And so the way I'm able, I feel, to walk into those spaces with integrity is I'm grateful to be in a season in my life when I'm not hungry for them to like me, right? There are earlier periods where it would have been very important to me to be pleasing, to be acceptable, right? To be valued in that space. Um, but I come in with a commitment to truth, a commitment to wanting and needing things to be better. And so um, as I write, it also helps me to process what's happening in those spaces because I would say as a spiritual person and as a psychologist, you're experiencing what's being said, but you're also experiencing what's not being said. And I have jokingly said among friends that church culture has prepared me for these meetings because there's like an agenda and then there's like an unspoken agenda. And so needing to like it's almost like group therapy, right? Needing to take in all of what's happening around you while staying true to what's happening in you and the people who paved the way for me to be where I am. And so I'm writing myself in to occupying the fullness of my identity and my role. Yeah.
That is beautiful.
Thank you.
It kind of leads me, wow. It kind of, I love the idea of writing your way in versus writing your way out. And I
Right.
think, just that in itself, that phrase, it just almost pushes you to be more present in your writing versus kind of almost running away. And everything that
Right.
in there is like beautiful. So I love that. Writing away in.
Thank you. And there is a time and a space for all of it, right? When the times I needed to exit, then it was great. It was very good for me to be able to like write my way out of, be my own cheerleader, my own encourager to get out of spaces. But then also uh, to not define myself by what I left, but what
Wow,
do I choose? What do I choose?
I love that. So in your writing, and that this is based off of, what you've just, spoken on briefly as well. There's a huge theme of like acceptance and understanding and growth. What would you say inspires you the most, or what influences you to kind of take that path instead of any other kind of path when it comes to your
Yeah.
writing?
Yeah. So, and I appreciate the observation. So I am both a trauma psychologist and a trauma survivor. And I teach trauma, right? I teach, how to help people heal from trauma. And so my lived experience and my professional experience put in the center of my being the importance of gentleness, the importance of compassion. I think truth often gets a bad reputation where when people are harsh, they will applaud themselves by saying, I'm just a truth teller, right? I just tell it like it is. And it becomes almost an equivalent where to be cruel is to be truthful. And so then people associate kindness with fakeness. Isn't that interesting, right? If you're kind, people think you're being fake. If you're being rude, then you're telling the truth. And so, what I have found for myself and for other people is that this myth of tough love as being the only love, right, or the only way to transform, I find it's not really true, that it often causes people to shut down or to reject or to fight. And so, what one of my good friends says is she goes, Tava, you're so gentle, you'll cut me and I don't know I've been cut until I'm like, wait, am I bleeding? So I think, there's a way of trying to, because I would say in my writing, I'm trying to get people to see something about themselves or to see something about the world, but to present it in a way where people can actually hear it instead of fight against it automatically.
Wow. Okay. That's beautiful. So in that, the thing that I think I admire the most about you and your writing is the fact that you consistently share your work. And it's we live in a climate, I guess now, especially with a lot of the writers in this room as well, where you know they feel just that the eyes of the world on them, or just their peers, or just opinion, outside opinion and things like that. How would you feel like you deal with imposter syndrome, or just external opinions, or things like that?
Yeah. So I appreciate that question. A couple of things come to mind. One is I think frequency helps me to counter the idea that it has to be a masterpiece.
Mm,
Like I post something every day. So let's say today it wasn't good. I'm gonna post again tomorrow, right? Versus if if I spend 5 years working on a masterpiece, then it's like all of these years went into this. And so this must be the most phenomenal thing ever, right? Versus you want to say writers write. If I just keep writing, I just keep letting it flow. So for me, frequency takes the pressure off versus some people who think, oh, if you write that much, that would feel like a lot of pressure. For me, it makes it easier. It makes it less weighty, right? It is not as costly to me because, the river is going to keep flowing. Um, I think in terms of imposter syndrome, and I know I do want to name that some people have like pushed back on that label because they'll say when we say imposter syndrome, it makes it seem like the problem is within us, whereas many of us work and live in environments where we are made to feel we are not wanted or not acceptable. So it is not solely like your so it's one thing, is it my imagination, right? Where I'm just feeling like I'm not good enough, but like where did that come from? And have I been given those messages? It's like, I remember sharing my work early on. I think I was probably a graduate student. And I shared one of my poems with another graduate student. It was a young white woman. And she says to me, um, that's not a poem. I don't know what that is, but that's not a poem. So it's like this idea of of like what is poetry or what is right. So those kinds of experiences, if you've had those and now you're doubting yourself, to just know that your self-doubt or insecurity did not originate with you, that it may make sense given the feedback or responses you have given. And so it takes an intentional force to push back on the messages that told you that you were not worthy. And then the last thing I'll just say about it is probably, that may be unique to me, but maybe perhaps some others who are here, is the realities of me being bivocational or multivocational, meaning if any of the things I do are all that somebody else does, they have more time to put into it. And so it's going to come out in a different way, right? So, in other words, like I dance, but I'm not a professional dancer, right? If I had dedicated my life solely to dance, then my dancing would be in a different place, right? And so I can say the same thing about writing, right? Some people are full-time writers, right? That is what they have given themselves to, for the fullness for full time, right? So I'm teaching classes, I'm seeing clients, I'm writing, I'm doing various things. And so instead of having an insecurity about that, for me, that's what authenticity is, that these different notes are all me. And something that was freeing for me, advice that came from my mom, who is wonderful, is I was having this dilemma when I was doing a lot of spoken word, a lot of slam competitions and this kind of thing. And so people who experienced me in poetry, they would say, why are you wasting your life in the academy? Right? Like you're clearly a poet, a performer, a writer. Like, why are you wasting away with that other thing? Now, people who experience me in psychology, they say, why would you waste your time going to poetry coffee houses? Like, you're an amazing psychologist, and this other stuff is like frivolous. And so, I was telling my mom about this, these different tensions. And she said, and I'm going to do it in her voice because she has a really unique voice. She goes, Tama, single gifted people will rarely understand multi gifted people. To them, you will always appear scattered. Just keep being everything that you are. So that's what I do.
goodness, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a perfect message, even just for everyone in this room, because a lot of people, writing is one facet to them, but they have so many different layers. And I feel like, it's very rare now to be embraced for everything that you are versus just being embraced for just little pockets of who you give yourself out to be. So that is like so powerful and so strong. Shouts
Yeah.
out to your mom for that.
Oh, absolutely. She's a winner. She drops jewels regularly.
I'm gonna be keeping that one close.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of, it's funny because that actually like leads into the next question I have, and now I kind of have a better idea of what you would feel about this, but with that being said, would you feel like a lot of your writing is for people who need to hear, these words? Or would you say that a lot of your writing is for you and you need to hear them? And by that, people are kind of just, gathering what they may need to.
Yeah. I would say it's both. Because sometimes I am writing out of my own personal reflection and out of my own experience. And sometimes it's coming from other sources, like talking to a friend, talking to a client, watching something on television, so it's a buffet of sources, but sometimes I am talking to myself and just happen to share it in public.
I love it. I love it. Um, so this is going to be my last question before I give it off to the floor. But what advice would you give to any writers or anyone trying to submit, their article to a publisher or anything like that, who are just kind of scared of judgment, scared of releasing that book, scared of submitting that article? What advice would you give to anyone kind of operating, in a place of fear or a place of doubt?
Mhm.
Yeah, what kind of words or
Yeah.
advice would you give them?
Yeah. So I would say your work doesn't have to be for everyone, it will be for someone, and to let that be enough, right? That when you write it, there'll be some people who don't get it, some people who are not interested in it, and some people who will say, I needed to hear that. And so it's not about, and I know it can be difficult to say, but it's not about the crowd or the masses of would it be enough for you if one, it was healing for you, and two, it was healing or touched or thought provoking or engaging for someone, right? Would that be sufficient? And then I would also say, if you love it, which I'm assuming because you're here, right? We love it. Um, to know that the seasons when you are just sowing your seed, right? When you are doing it maybe without feeling like any significant reward, that the harvest can come later. And so, what I mean by that is, I'll do the post and then that leads to other things. Or about almost 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, I started my podcast, and my podcast is what led to my book deal. Right now, I didn't have advertisers on my podcast. You could say, like, why are you doing that week after week faithfully? Right? You're just putting it out there, just putting it out there. And and the harvest comes in different forms and maybe not in forms you had imagined. Because I had book ideas, but the book idea was not homecoming, but homecoming is the podcast, and that's where the energy went. And I'm grateful for it. And so continue to do what you do and to put it out there. One, it can nourish somebody, and two, it can yield more than you imagined.
I love that. Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. That is a lot. Really beautiful. And yeah, just everything is perfect. A lot of
Ah,
those questions, are questions that I feel like a lot of the people in the community are always, just curious about, especially when it comes to other writers who are just like established and stuff like that. So I think, a lot of people needed to hear that. See, Stephanie just said it too. And yeah, so thank you so much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give the floor some questions. So if you have any questions for Dr. Thema, please raise your hand in the chat or above, and I will pick on you and she can answer what questions you may have. Ross, I will take a question from you first.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we do.
Right on. I was wondering how you guys both, I guess, deal with writer's block.
Okay, Dr. Thema, if you want to take that, that'd be fine.
Yes. Um, for me, and I guess it's like learning yourself. For me, I get inspired by engaging in life. I know some people write better in silence or solitude or like have to get away from everything for the words to come. For me, it hits me in living, right? So I'm interacting with a girl 9 years old and she says something and it's like, whoa, right? And I'm having to grab a napkin to like write down the flood that comes. So it's learning your rhythm. So paying attention to your patterns, the times when you wrote before, you know, what was conducive to creating that for you. And I would also say being open to stretch yourself because I know some people who will say like they can only write if they're upset. Well, okay, like that can be helpful, and maybe something else will come if I'm willing to write out of a different place. So for me, getting involved with in living and interacting with people brings the inspiration.
Right on. Thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would just to add on to that, I would agree. I think one of the biggest things I've learned with writer's block is just being patient with yourself through whatever season you're in. Like if you are, struggling to actually put something down, then maybe you just are meant to be struggling in that moment to put something down. So don't, distract yourself with other things, get back to the other things that make you you, and somehow the writing will come back, and just kind of look for the things that inspire you. And sometimes you'll find that your writing comes from a completely different place than you originally wanted it to come from. So I think everything you said was amazing, and I would definitely agree with all of that. I see Sasha has her hand up or their hand up. Sasha, if you want to go ahead and respond or ask a question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys hosting this platform. And Billy, I've been following you on Twitter, and this is how I got to know about this event. So I really admire your work a lot. And Dr. Tim, I look forward to engaging with your podcast now that I know about it. But my question is around the aspect of being multivocational. I really appreciate that you touched on that because that's something that I feel I've been experiencing and didn't know that there were actual terms for it until just about like 2 weeks ago, where I tend to feel like I'm a jack of all trades and like I'm passionate about multiple things and like I'm creative, but also work a 9 to 5, right? And so sometimes it can be difficult to allocate my time and my resources towards any one thing in particular. So I'll pursue something and go down that path like faithfully for maybe a year, and then the next thing pops up and then I focus on that and everything else kind of stops. So I'm just wondering how it is that you're able to manage that and how you're able to balance all of your passions.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. So, one of the things I would say is to set an intention. I do not just want to be a visionary, I want to be a completer, right? We can get a lot of visions, a lot of creative inspiration, but I want to see it through. So it's like if I am writing and set the intention for writing the book, and then midway through the book, I'm like, oh, but I'm also interested in this. It's like that will be there, and I want to complete, right? I want to complete the things that I started. And then the other thing that has been a blessing for me is seeing how these different pieces of myself feed each other, as opposed to it being in competition or like, oh, I don't have time for this because I'm doing this. So they're like set up as opposed. It is, how can my creativity show up in my teaching? How can my teaching show up in my ministry? How can I minister when I'm dancing? So looking for ways for the pieces to feed each other. And I would say, even if you're working a 9 to 5 you don't particularly care for, that may end up being the roots of your novel, right? Like I have, you experience some characters, right? It's like I don't have to make this stuff up. These characters show up. And so look for ways for the work to feed each other. And then also, when you are multi-gifted, uh, needing to be intentional about your schedule, right? Like if I am doing one thing, then I can just kind of let it flow naturally whenever, whatever, because that's going to be my one thing. But if I have multiple things, I do have to be intentional about setting a schedule and protecting time. And what I would also say to you is notice the parts of yourself that you're missing, right? There was a period where I got away from the constant spoken word, when I became a parent, because a lot of times these poetry coffee houses are like a weeknight at 10 p.m. That's how it was in LA before a pandemic. So it's like that. Y'all didn't make that for mothers. So I just remember one day I was on YouTube and watching people perform, and I was like, I'm not I miss poetry. It was I miss me, right? I miss me. So then I had to get real clear of like, yeah, I still can't do Tuesdays at 10 p.m., but how do I revive that part of myself and not neglect it?
Thank you so much. That was so helpful.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Stephanie, you can go ahead with your question.
Yeah, hi. Thank you both so much for this space. And I'm a huge fan of your art and your writing. I'm wondering how often were you writing during the process of publishing your first book? And if you can just share like what did your day to day look like? Were you writing every day? Like how did that process look like for you all?
Yes. So I'll say for the homecoming book, um, probably from the time I signed the contract to when the book was due was about 9 months. And I wrote almost every day, but not every day. And I'm going to give you some humor about myself is there came a point where I thought I wasn't going to make the deadline. And so I'm just writing. And what I did was I was writing all the chapters as separate documents. And so what happened is when I put the book together, I overwrote. Because they give you a word limit. I had just been writing. I wrote too much. It's not even all in the book. That's gonna have to be homecoming part two. So uh, so I would just say about 9 months, and not every day, but nearly every day.
Yeah, I would say my process is very organic, in the sense that I don't even know that I have a book until I actually have one. But just like writing consistently and actually dedicating just like intentional time to saying that I want this to be a tangible, piece of work. That has always been kind of my process through my writing in terms of my books and things like that. So it's just giving myself that intentional time to say, hey, like today I'm going to, write a few pages on, love or on healing or just something that is the theme for myself that week. And when I actually get down to the end of, everything I've written, that's when I kind of just like compile things and make sure it makes sense, different chapters and things like that. But the process itself is very organic, and I find that that's what makes it more fun for me. I never want it to feel like it's just work and a job, because writing is what gives me the most amount of joy and the most amount of just pleasure. So making that process feel as less work like as possible has always helped me, and that's always just been what my process has been. It's been very organic, especially that it's poetry. It doesn't necessarily have to always just stay on the course of one specific topic. So very organic, and but also very intentional at the same time too. All right, I think we have another question. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Medea.
Yeah, hiya.
Hey.
Hi. I just want to say to both of you, I'm a massive fan. I've been following Billy on Twitter and Dr. Tamer since your first podcast. I've been a fan.
Wow.
I just wanted to ask, Dr. Tamer, when you mentioned about saying in your grad school that you wrote a poem and being told that that's not a poem or that's not the structure or whatever, how long did it take you? Because I feel like with me, I use external stuff to define who I am, and I can't seem to let go of those words. Can I just ask you, like, how did you detach from the external kind of? Yeah, sorry, if that made
No,
sense.
great.
Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. It's a great question. So one, two things that helped. One was this person was not, in my mind, an authority figure. And I do think it probably would have been more painful or devastating if I, perceived them to be some kind of great poet or poetry teacher. They were a peer in a lot of ways, a graduate student with me. So that made it less stinging. The other piece was in that time, I was already sharing my work and other people were appreciating it. So I think it would have been more harmful if I never shared and then I shared with this one person. I took the risk and they said, that's garbage. Then kind of I would go back in my shell. But instead, it was like, and during that time, I could go to the 10 p.m. coffee house. So I had a weekly, and it was literally every week, a weekly experience of sharing my work and having people respond to it in important ways that let me know that my voice mattered and that my voice was saying something important. And so then I could release it as like not only that she doesn't know what she's talking about or just her experience of what poetry is very narrow. Because let me say, I've also had people say that, but they mean it in a compliment. So, meaning I have shared poetry in a setting that was predominantly Black and had people say, I don't like poetry, but I like that. And so it's like, who were the poets you were exposed to, right? It was things that didn't make sense to you, right? Or did not reflect your experience. And so I would say sharing more helps an individual's response not to carry so much weight in your mind because you're receiving other feedback.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Catherine, I know you said you weren't given the raise hand option, but if you would like, you can go ahead and
Thank
ask your question.
you. Thank you. First of all, I feel like this is kind of serendipitous for me because I've been following Billy on Twitter for a while, and I've also been applying to graduate school recently for counseling psychology. So I've been kind of always interested in writing, loved writing. But I find that sometimes it's hard for me to write about something that I truly care about, and I put a lot of pressure on myself. So I think for me, even applying to graduate school, there was a lot of anxiety coming with the personal statement. And I've kind of felt like, okay, this has to be the best thing I've ever written because this means so much to me and I want to get admitted. And so I guess my question is how to kind of take that evaluation out of it. And also just, I think hearing back from grad schools, and I know it's like a super competitive year right now, but trying not to take like rejection personally, because having like written personal statements and feeling like there's a certain level of vulnerability and speaking to experience about that. I think it's been hard for me to try to kind of not take that personally. And I would just be interested to know like what you think, like as someone in the field right now too, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, great question. And I'm going to say, welcome to the field. I'm glad you're interested. So, yes, in the essay, wanting to give people a sense of who you are as a person, right?
Mhm,
Not only like what are my goals, but like my lived experience
mhm,
helps us to think about in a classroom setting that this is someone who will be able to share from a sensibility or from a vantage point
mhm,
that is unique in some ways, right? That
right,
is thoughtful. Um, so, and I think to help to take the weight or the pressure off can be, I know this might not feel good, but to write more than one, right?
mhm,
I mean, you can only turn in one, but sometimes just writing more than one, I'll get a sense of like enthusiasm for one, or I can show them to like a couple of people and see, what they think between the two.
mhm,
And then just two cautions I will give, and I'll stop with that. So
mhm.
one is if a piece of it is poetic, make that just the introduction and then shift.
Okay.
Just because I've had some people turn in statements and it's all like in the abstract. And
Mhm.
that, you're as the professor, they're like, you know, you don't get a clarity about
Right,
how this
right.
person thinks, right?
Mhm,
And then I would say uh, in the in the sharing, maybe if there are like life challenges or what have you, to
mhm.
speak about it in a way that is clear, you've done some reflection or working through it,
Right.
because some people share and it feels like they're kind of in crisis, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gotcha. No, that makes sense.
yeah.
Thank you. And then I
You're
also was
welcome.
just curious about trauma and writing and healing and what that process has been like for you. Because I mean, I think that's something I would definitely be interested in and would like to be like work as a trauma therapist someday, and would be something I'd be interested in working with clients about as well.
Yes. So, there's great research that shows that writing is healing. So, one of the researchers you can look at is Baker, which is interesting that the word pen is in his last name. But he does all these studies to find that when you journal about these difficult events, even if you never share it, just the writing process itself can really relieve a lot of distress for people. And another approach you might like is narrative therapy, which is about
Mm-hmm.
like the story we tell about ourselves and
Right.
how like needing to shift. So I'm not just someone who gets acted upon, but I have agency and I have voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Okay. I think we will take two more questions. Sasha, I believe you have another question.
I do. I'll keep it short.
Oh, you're good.
I'm just wondering, and this is a question that both of you could answer. Um, I'm I've dabbled in writing before and had a blog, and I found that it was a great creative release. But in trying to build up from that and take it one step further into potentially writing a book. The part that I found difficulty with is, you know, starting off and then kind of jumping towards the end of what it is that I'm writing, and not necessarily knowing how to build up that in between, like the meat of what it is that I'm writing. So I'm just wondering if you guys would have any advice for someone that is writing a book or perhaps a long article in terms of just how to structure everything and make sure that, you know, there are no missing details, because, you know, I'm kind of in a hurry to, you know, write out the beginning, the intro, and then jump straight to the final part of where I'm trying to go. And I hope that question translates.
Yes, yes. So I think, and from what you're describing, writing, that outline does really help in terms of like what are the building blocks. So you may know where you want it to end. Like when they come away from reading this, what do I want them to know? And then having to push back sometimes on our assumptions, because we can assume everybody is starting from the same place or they already know the things I know, which might not be the case. And so that's then how I figure out, working backwards, what are the things I need to describe to be able to get to that ending point. And then I can play with the order of them, but like these are the components.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Maria, you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much. And thank you for this wonderful conversation. I have a question about your editing process. And I'm wondering, how do you guard your authentic voice, if you will, during the editing process? You know, whether it's you're working on a poem or an article or a book or whichever media you're working on at a given time, and whether that has changed over time for you as you gather experience in various different media. And particularly, I'm thinking about when working with people who may come from different life experiences than, you know, than you, the writer.
Yeah, great question. So for me, it is really important to be open to feedback. Um, and as you say, and at the same time, like guarding my voice, right? So the feedback is important because um, sometimes, you know, we just don't catch everything. Or what I was saying before, sometimes you can assume something is understood, but it's not. So it's helpful when people are like, what did that mean? Right? Because I'm not trying to require a decoder, right? Like I am trying to communicate something. Uh, and so, or sometimes if someone suggests a word, because they may even say, well, in the prior line, you use that same word. So maybe you want to pick a different word. And like I hadn't noticed that, right? Um, and then there are times, and that's why it's important to know yourself, right? There are times when people make a suggestion and that's not me. Like that doesn't sound like me. That doesn't feel like me. That's not what I want to say. That's not how I would say it. That sounds like that's your poem. That's not my poem. And so uh, I think when you're not walled off, right? When people experience you as being open, I'm not going to accept every edit, but I am open, then it makes it an easier process, right? So, and I'll just tell you in terms of self-publishing versus working with a publisher, that, you know, basically I was advised, if you are the kind of writer that once you write it, you're like, that's it, that's how it came to me, I don't want to change anything, then it's better to self-publish, right? If you work with a publisher, they're going to give you feedback, but it's not required that you take all their edits. Um, but it's meant to like help in service of what you're trying to communicate. So having a relationship, like I could trust them. One, I felt like they got me, like they understood me. And when I said no, it was no, like there was not a back and forth about it. But it is important to take constructive feedback and also not lose your voice.
Beautiful. Miriam, I hope that answered your question. Then I do see one question that's in the chat. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read it. I believe it's directed towards you, Dr. Thema. Do you ever feel conflicted in what you write due to your professional ethics and standards, or do you always write with your profession in mind?
I feel free to write as myself. So I guess two things come to mind. One, because I'm right, let's say both in the book and in social media, I'm writing generally. So what I mean by that is like I would have an ethical responsibility not to make my clients' decisions for them, right? But when I am posting something, even though people feel like I'm talking to them personally, I'm actually not. And so, um, what I mean by that is, for example, I would never say to an individual client, that's it. You just need to break up with that person, right? But if I say in a post, if you're tired of your wings being stood on, it's time to escape the cage. I say that. I don't feel any ethical conflict about saying that because if it registers for you, if that feels true for you, then that's your application. The other part I will say that some people may have attention about is speaking up around justice issues. And for me, I don't think neutrality in the face of injustice is professional. I think it's cowardice. So I'm willing to speak up about justice as a professional.
Awesome. Well, Makeba, I hope that answered your question. Looks like it did. So awesome. I think we're gonna wrap up the Q&A part so we can go on to the next part of the event, which would be pretty much the writing prompts. We're gonna go into like a mixer and everything. But before we do that, I just want to thank you once again, Dr. Thema, for coming through. I've like absorbed so much from everything that you've had to say. So I know so many people in the room, so many of the writers here, and aspiring writers and everything. I just know they've taken so much from everything that you've had to say. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I love your work, love what you're doing, love that you've created this space for writers. And so I'm grateful to be able to come through.
Yes, thank you. And I'm still obviously in the middle of reading this, and I just want everyone in here, if you get the chance, to please get her book, Homecoming. It came out on the 15th, and it's awesome. But yeah, Dr. Tima, I know when we spoke earlier, you said you had one writing prompt.
Yes, would you like me to share it? All right.
Yes. What I'm gonna do is we'll have a total of 3 writing prompts. So I'm gonna post 2 in the chat for everyone to see. And then, yeah, if you want to go ahead and you can say yours, you can write it out. It's really up to you.
Okay.
But once that's posted, we'll break into these groups and we'll come back and just kind of wrap the night up.
All right. So I find in most cases that tears are truthful. I know sometimes people fake cry, but we're not talking about the fake crying right now. So I would invite you to write about a time that you cried that you have not written about before, to consider what you felt in your body, what was in the space around you, to consider your breath and the sounds or the lack of sound of your crying, and to consider the evolution, what was happening right before, during, and after you stopped. And finally, to give your tears words. What were your tears saying?
I love that. It's a great question.
Thank you.
All right. So, Becky, if you want to go ahead and just split everyone up, and I will see everyone back here in about 10 to 15 minutes. All right. So got a few people back. Just gonna start wrapping up the night. But I guess I just wanted to leave it to the floor and see if anyone had anything they wanted to share in regards to the prompt, any prompts, any inspiration that they might have felt, anything they want to share with the rest of the group. Yeah, I would love to hear. I would love to hear from the floor just in regards to the prompts and stuff like that. And if no one has any questions there, we can always just move on to just a general Q&A just to wrap up the night.
I think in my group, and maybe it was a common theme for the evening, is just authenticity and truth. Whether you're a writer or not a writer or a reader of someone else's lovely words, someone else's lovely words are their truth. So I think that's a theme for me this evening is truth and authenticity.
Yes, I agree 100%. I feel like to be authentic, you have to be truthful and honest with yourself first. And I think Dr. Thema really, really, put that point across in a lot of what she was saying. There's really not going to be the essence you're trying to embody unless you're bringing your full self to whatever you're doing. And, whether that's writing, whether that's, in the breakout room that we were in, we had someone who wasn't a writer, but as long as you bring truth and honesty into whatever it is that you do, you allow yourself to really embody everything that you're trying to do, without any masks, without any shadows, without you disguising yourself in any kind of way. But it all starts with you. It all starts with, like you said, Erica, truth and honesty. So I love that.
And I think in my group, one of the common themes for us was vulnerability, having the ability to make yourself vulnerable to the process, not only for yourself, but also perhaps for others as well, as you share what you write. And that also can help in making sure that you authentically, express what it is that you may be trying to get across.
Yes, and that is something else that is major. That's just really huge. Vulnerability. Without you really just being, and I think that ties into honesty as well. It's just, without allowing yourself to be vulnerable to a certain extent, you really can't bring your full self, because a lot of parts of yourself are parts that, you are going to be scared to show the rest of the world, that you are going to be a little bit frightened of certain people knowing about. But that's where that vulnerability aspect comes in. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that's definitely something that's extremely important in making sure your authentic self is really showing fully. So thank you for that, Michaela. I'm sorry, I was just reading something in the chat there. But yes, if anyone else has any other questions, any reflections on the night, and we can definitely wrap up. It's been so amazing and beautiful to hear from different people and Dr. Thema. So if anyone else has anything to say, we definitely welcome that on as well. All right, well, we are definitely going to host another session. Me and Mikhail are working on different guests to bring. Our goal is to bring in different people from just different kinds of backgrounds and different writing, professions and things like that, just so that everyone in the community can get something different and something new with every session. But we will definitely be sending a recording of the talk to everyone and more info through Foster. So if you did register for this and you want to rewatch it, you can definitely do that. And we will definitely be giving more info in terms of like the talks that we'll be having we plan to probably send an email out with the next guest out as well. But other than that, I just want to thank everyone for coming through today. This was like such an amazing talk, and I feel like I've gathered so much in terms of just authenticity and how to be more authentic in my writing. So I hope that everyone has gathered the same. And yeah, like I said, we plan to do more of these, and we'll definitely keep you guys in the loop. And just thank you so much for coming out. It's been awesome engaging with all of you.